Welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast with Stuart Fensterheim, LCSW, your source for the latest tips and practical down-to-earth advice on creating emotionally connected, thriving relationships. Now, here's Stuart.
Hi, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. This is Stuart Fensterheim. Welcome back again for our journey to really understand some of the things that we need to do to have that close, connected, really intimate relationship with our partners. The kind of relationship that you know both of you are in this world together and that you're going to really be able to really stand side by side, having a relationship in which both of you could be really proud of. You know, today is Wednesday, and one of the things that I'm doing is a recording today for all of you that I am so thrilled. One of the things that I have heard in my office over the last few weeks is countless couples talking about both of them are business entrepreneurs. But the problem is they're working around the clock. And what they're doing is they are working so hard, they're realizing that they're really just passing two ships in the night. So what I've gone and done is brought onto my podcast, not a counselor, but someone who is a specialist in just that area. This is a woman who is an entrepreneur, who is a business owner, and has realized what the way to success is and wealth. That wealth is more about money and is less about money. Sorry, guys, maybe that was a Freudian slip. Is less about money and more about success and happiness. And she has a system that she's put together that I want her to share with all of you so that I don't have to have couples coming into my office who are saying, we are not sure that we should be together. We are great at being like roommates. We can live together, but we don't even have a relationship. We're strangers. And part of that is because we both are absolutely ingrained in making money and becoming wealthy. And that by that pursuit involves sacrifice. And that sacrifice is going to have to be relationships. Well, when I heard about Leisa, what I decided to do is give her a call. And she is an amazing person. And her system is so wonderful because it really looks at all the different areas in your world and has us staying focused on what really is important, which is our family, our relationships, and not sacrificing success in that. What I love about her is that she is known for her ability to quickly identify what are those issues that are holding someone back from really achieving greatness? Because greatness really is about getting everything you want. And what we know is that in order to do that, you have to have a relationship in your life that's emotionally secure. And she uses a number of different techniques to really take a look at what are the emotional obstacles that are standing in the way of your own success. And what we know, some of that has to do with how you view yourself, your life, and what you need to be successful. And because of all the things and all the people that she has helped, and one of the things that's really neat about it is she's someone that what I like to say, and I've talked about this with myself and the people that have come on my show, is that I only have people that comes on my show that not just walks the walk, not just talks the talk, but walks the walk. And I think you guys know what that all means. My community of listeners have heard me talk about that we want people that are not hypocritical. People who say, do this, but what you learn is they do something else. That's not her. She has done this for herself, and she reaches out to the community at large, helping people really understand what it's going to take to really feel successful in your life, both in your family life, and in your financial life. So, Leisa, I want to really thank you for agreeing to come on to my show. I know you're living right now in Sedona. I'm jealous about that. And welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast.
Thank you, Stuart, so much for having me.
You know, we were talking before we started a bit about your path and a little bit about mine, and I'd love to have you share with my audience a little bit about why you chose the field that you chose and a little bit about how it fits or doesn't fit with who you are and the path that you've come.
Wonderful question. Big question. I talk a lot about my background, mainly from the idea that I came up working in the money business for the past 25 years. And I was drawn to the money business because I had some deep scarcity issues growing up. And I find that that's not all that uncommon. Sorry if anybody's in the money business, but I find that we're drawn to the things that we don't understand that cause us a lot of pain and suffering. And money did that for me growing up. And I ended up going into the money business. So now what has happened is instead of just being in the money business, over time, I started to realize that being in the money business wasn't going to help me as much as being able to be aware of what money does to us and how money affects us. And so my path has been working my way through the financial services industry in many different roles. I was a mortgage banker and underwriter. I've been an entrepreneur on the side with my husband for more than 20 years. I eventually became a financial planner. And all along that experience, I also had this thing that I didn't really understand at the time, but what it is I have a deep inner connection, what is called being an empathetic person, where I can feel people's emotions at a deep level that goes beyond, I'd say, the norm. And working in the money business and working with people, I would notice things that nobody else noticed. And one example of that is as a financial planner, when people would come to work with me on, setting up a retirement plan or an investment strategy, they would sit down in my office, and the minute their butt hit the seat, I would notice, or they started to talk about their money, I would notice that energetically, part of the human being was no longer in the room. It was like I couldn't bring them back. They just kind of ran away. And it's really hard to explain, but what would happen is I would have a very hard time, even if it was a friend who now was sitting in front of me to talk about financial planning, I couldn't get the friend back. I just saw this other kind of robotic or sometimes highly emotional person that would show up that wouldn't really connect with me anymore at the level that I was used to connecting with them at. And that happened for years and years before one day I realized that this was a trend and it was something that I might actually be able to do something about. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense because, I've had similar experiences in my office with couples or sometimes individuals as well, where something that has such a high, intense emotional connection for people just takes over them, and it's sort of like they disappear, almost like a dissociative state.
Very much so. And I would notice, too, that not everyone was that way, but for example, especially in financial planning, oftentimes you're working with couples. And so the couples would come and I would notice that they were behaving very differently on the topic of money than they would in normal business, normal living their lives. And one person would become the dominant and one person would become the more, kind of shy and not want to talk and not want to be engaged. And I would see these dynamics happening where it wasn't really healthy, is the best I can say. Like I could tell that one person wasn't saying the things that were important to them, and the other person was kind of dominating the whole situation. And that was concerning to me because, like you, I'm very oriented to connecting with other people and making sure that other people are connecting with one another. It's just part of who I am. So it made it painful.
Especially as a couple, if you see people not really connecting the way they normally do, just the pain and anguish of the lack of that connection. And if you throw money on top of that, that's a tremendous amount of stress for a couple.
It totally was. And I ended up testing some things, and I had already been teaching meditation and mindfulness practices on the side. And I was teaching people about how to improve their relationships, how to become a better person, how to become less angry. I was teaching all these things, but I did not touch the topic of money. It scared me, quite frankly, even though I worked in it every day. I didn't teach about money. And one day I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do a workshop about money and feelings. And I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to do it. And it was like the biggest workshop I'd ever done. Like, all these people showed up and they were so excited. And I looked out and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to do my best here, but I'm on to something. Like, people want to talk about this and they don't know how to get answers. So that was really the beginning of this journey that I continue to today, which is helping people, get in touch with their relationship with money. And many times our relationship with money overlaps with our relationship with other people, especially our partners. I mean, I've been married for 24 years, in a relationship for almost 30. I know better than most people what it's like to deal with money in a relationship and all the roller coaster experiences. And I think, as you said in your introduction, I am not one to tell other people to do things that I don't do. Like, I'm my own guinea pig, and my husband just kind of thinks, oh no, what's she up to? Because I'm always testing things with him, right?
Here we go again. It's like my wife says, did I really have to be married to a therapist? I mean, we all have that. And I want to sort of piggyback on some of what you're saying, because in my office, probably where I see some of the biggest pain is when money is being addressed and there's just two different positions. So I want to just sort of reinforce a lot of what you're saying, that money and emotions, there's nothing that's more intense.
It's so true. It's so true. I actually have a story with my husband that feels so good to share right now. Would that be okay? Because I think it would really help listeners. As I said, we've been together for almost 30 years, and both of us enjoy living frugally. I will admit that makes things more easy than other couples that don't agree on that. But the funny thing is his idea of frugal is tent camping, and my idea of frugal is getting a fantastic deal at the Phoenix Biltmore in the off season, right? So you get the feel already of what goes on for us. And it is where some of our challenges come up, but probably because he doesn't always trust me to live the way he wants to live. I think that happens a lot in relationships. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. When I would like you to clarify, though, when you say, because I'm not sure how, if the listeners really understand that whole concept of trust.
Ooh, yeah.
He doesn't trust your judgment in that area. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, totally. Because we both have different ways of looking at the world, and the things that are important to us are different. And what can happen, I mean, stepping back for a moment, I've been on this incredible, deep inner spiritual journey. I'll say spiritual, which is really just a, catch-all phrase for me right now, but looking inside and figuring out how to solve the pain and suffering that I felt in my life for most of my life until about 17 years ago. And I've been on an intense journey to uncover, unlock, and reclaim my happiness and really my joy. My husband's been on his same path, but not doing it in the way that I've been doing it. And why I bring that up is we have different ways of looking at the world. Because of all this work I've done, I think I'm very quick to accept that someone has a different perspective reality than I do. And so when I say trust, he doesn't trust the way that I live, there's still a bit of judgment there that I have a way of doing life that isn't the way he would choose to do life. And that's okay. Like, there's no problem with it as long as it's above it's out in the open and we talk about it. So just because trust might be in question doesn't mean it's actually a problem. It's a problem when nobody's actually realized that that's going on. Is that fair?
That's very fair. And the other piece that goes along with that is the whole concept of taking risks and being vulnerable with your partner, to even acknowledging that difference and saying it's something that we have to look at, and that it creates at times misinterpretations that we make of each other.
I love that. It's so true.
And a willingness to really be vulnerable in that way with your partner allows you to solve the issues so it doesn't impact the two of you in any great way.
Totally. But, as life happens and you're in a relationship too, that we do get these blind spots where we don't see things as they are. Instead, we're caught up in the story. And I think that's what this experience of mine kind of evidences is. For 27 years, I've been the one who managed the money, which means I paid the bills, I invested the money, I figured out what we could afford in our business activities together. I have a good sense of spending and what we're earning. And my husband seemed to be okay with that for a really long time. However, when I started my company, and you mentioned that you went through something similar to this, but when I started my company, things started to get bumpy because for the first time, I stopped earning lots of money and started spending lots of it. Do you know how that goes when you're first starting out? And I told my husband I had a plan for what was going to happen. And as the months went by, I started to see that my estimates on costs were way too low and my estimates for income were way too high. And I didn't understand really what I had gotten myself into. And I was making, I will admit now, a lot of costly mistakes. I was learning, but that didn't really, that wasn't very satisfying to him. He's just looking at the money. And I can only imagine looking back how hard it must have been for him, because he wanted to be supportive of me, but he would hear me talk about the mistakes, and his trust level, right? So here's the trust word, really started to wane. The more I shared, the worse he felt. And eventually I stopped sharing all that much, right? Because that's what we do. We kind of say, well, this isn't helping, it's making it worse. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I think that this is when one of those dark times that you mentioned began. Do you know what I'm referencing? Like, you talked about dark times in a relationship. Yeah. So we weren't communicating about money anymore. Even though we had been so good for so many years, it kind of stopped. And I wanted to avoid it because I didn't want to feel worse about what I was doing. And he wanted to avoid it because he was resenting my actions. And we'd end up, we were both kind of in massive resistance to our feelings at this point.
And shutting down and seeing each other as that there was an ability to reach for, because what I would imagine at those times for you, which would be one of the more insecure times that you would have had, because you're recognizing that things aren't going the way, you needed his support more then than ever. Mm-hmm. And you didn't see him as reachable.
No, because he had his own story about what was going on. He was feeling a lot of pain. And we lived like this for a while. There was the tension, the fights easily erupted. Even when my company started making more money, the tension was still there. And then one day my husband came to me, and it was really a breakdown. It was like the stress and the tension became way too much. He wasn't sleeping. It had been going on for a while, and he couldn't take it anymore. So he shared with me that what we were doing with our money was no longer working for him. And he kind of admitted some things that he hadn't really told me before, way beyond me starting a business. He's like, I hate your filing system. I think you're really disorganized. He was like, I feel like it's time for me to take on more ownership, because if I don't understand what's going on with our money, I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this. It's really, really hurting me. And I'm summarizing. It was a very painful conversation, but knowing money like I do, thank goodness, I was able to sit back as he started to share everything with me. And I couldn't believe how much I had missed it. Like, it did make perfect sense for him to be frustrated that I'd only been looking at it from my vantage point and never from his side. The idea that he had not had control of being able to go into our accounts, know what was going on, be able to see what, our net worth was or how much money was really going out. Like he had no idea. It just felt like a black hole. And I got it in that moment. Do you know those moments, Stuart?
Yes, and I think the other piece that from a connection standpoint, and one of the things that I look at with couples in particular is what are the attachment needs that people have that really connect them. And when you're talking about the experience I have with folks, that people have a lot of history of traumas when it comes with money. And what money represents, so people will fight about money, but they're really not fighting about money. What they're really fighting about is a feeling of security and stability. And do I see my partner as willing to help me feel secure in my life? So here he's feeling very insecure, and he's viewing you as the thing that's standing in the way of his security when you would love to be the one sharing that with him.
Totally. It's so true. And as a result of this conversation, we both had big breakthroughs because he realized that he wasn't, trusting me and I'm his best friend. And if he was going to talk about money with anybody, it would be me. So instead it was all bottled up inside of him. But now he was like, oh my gosh, he felt so much better. And I did too. And I call this, when you talk about my systems, I call that moment kind of two parts of the system. The first was we both became aware of the situation. And it all starts by awareness of what's happening, what's been going on, and what's not working. And then we also, in especially me sitting back, I was able to accept what is. Like, I didn't have to judge it. I didn't have to get mad at him. I didn't have to say, you can't control the finances. I was like just listening and being totally present to him, his feelings, and also my feelings without any resistance. And so it's the accepting that was so powerful that allowed me to have the shift. And I think, because I wasn't in resistance, he was able to enjoy the conversation after he got it out off of his chest. Does that help?
I think that's one of the biggest keys is, can you say, this is where I'm at, this is where you are at, and if we care about each other and we love each other, which the hope would be we do, we both want each other to feel good about things. So this is where we're beginning. Now, what do we need to do to have both of our needs get met?
Exactly. And so right away, we got him set up, of taking over several of the money tasks. I was like, I thought I had been helping him, right? I thought I had been helping him not worry. But in reality, I was helping him worry more. And so by me, sitting down at the computer and showing him where everything was and showing him about the credit card statements and the bank balances and the bill pay and introducing him to things that he had only gotten snippets of, he started to take more ownership. It wasn't easy. I'll admit, we had just set up home in Sedona. This is the beginning of this year. I mean, this is very recent. And in the beginning, he wasn't always on time with our payments. And there were some arguments like, I never missed the payments, but now you've taken it over. And, all that stuff that happens that isn't helpful.
And we never have had one before.
Yeah, but we had to work out the bugs, and that's part of learning something new. And so we both stuck with it. And now he's got more control of the family finances. And I actually asked him about it this morning because I knew we were going to talk. And I said, how's it going? And he's like, it has not been easy, he says to me, to see how much money is going out. I'll be the first to say that. He's like, but at least I know what's happening, and that feels really good. And his sleeping problem, isn't like it was. He doesn't worry about what's happening because he knows now. And just being aware has been huge for him. And I'm guessing, it'll continue to evolve. But that last part is what I call allowing a shift. So allowing the action to take place based on what wasn't working, and then moving, rather than resisting it, moving into communication and connection, and just being really cognizant that he's sensitive about this, and I want to educate and help him as much as I can, because, we've been together for a long time. It doesn't happen overnight.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking of stories where it's a little bit more serious in terms of, people who are, their house is about to get foreclosed and things really serious. And what I see people doing that I would love to get your sense of how you help couples away from this is all this blame.
Yeah.
It's your fault. If it wasn't for you, we'd never have this problem. And taking a look at that perspective and also looking at it from a perspective of we want to have a life where we're in touch with what we need, and how do we not allow that to just put us into this awful place?
Right. You're covering a major topic that comes up again and again and again in the work that I do. And I did grow up in a home where my parents were really good at blaming one another. And I carried that on into my relationship with my husband for many, many years. And it is a sickness, in my opinion, like a mental sickness, to blame others rather than be able to turn the finger back to oneself. And,
you know what? Can I interrupt you one moment?
Sure.
Because one of the things I do a couples weekend retreat, and we talk about this a lot. And what typically happens with this, okay, you got to have a blame-free relationship here, blame-free lifestyle. You don't blame others. You look at yourself and you look inward. And what typically happens is they start blaming themselves. They start doing blame on their own. Not blaming their partner, but blaming, it's all, I screwed up. I did that. I said, you know what? That's as bad as the other.
Yeah.
You can't blame yourself.
So right.
It's blame-free. That means we don't worry about fault. And so many people get so caught. It is a societal sickness.
Mm-hmm. It brings up a good point, because I totally agree. It is the minute we talk about not blaming someone else, then people often go into blaming themselves. And I would say this is part of the reason that my work is so oriented around building better understanding of oneself, and also the mantra that I love, which is everyone, including myself, is doing the best I possibly can in this given moment, period. And if we can come to an understanding that we ourselves are doing the best we can, and if we could have done it differently, we most definitely would have, but we didn't. We've got what we've got to work with, and we did what we could. And the idea that we can learn from our, experiences that don't work out the way we like, but the idea that we go back and pick ourselves apart is completely wasted time and space. It's more around, what can I do today and tomorrow and the next day to turn it around? And many times it does center around having a really healthy relationship with ourselves. I mean, I make jokes when I speak sometimes where I'll bring someone up, and hopefully it's a friend or someone, and I'll ask them a question. I'll say, well, how was your weekend? And they'll tell me something, and I'll turn it around and I'll do what the inner voice does, which was, how could you have done that? Like, that's really stupid. Why would you have done that when you could have done this? I mean, you really wasted your whole weekend, didn't you? And I'll make fun of it. But it's like, in reality, a lot of us have these negative voices that are nonstop of judging not just the world, but judging ourselves and our actions. And it's very painful, because if we're judging ourselves all the time, we're also judging others. And if we're judging others all the time, we're probably also judging ourselves quite a bit. And we have to break that habit.
Right. We yell at our children because they are mean to people, and we punish them, and we criticize sort of that thing, that we're really showing them in some ways that that's okay.
Yes.
Self-criticism, the same thing. It's no different.
It is.
And it's so sad, because you see all this pain around that. And what I've learned through the years is, if you are and you just you said it, but if you're self-critical and you're really harsh with yourself, then you're really doing the same with the world around you. And how much fun is that?
Yeah, it's a really tough life. One of the other things I like to use, are you familiar with Byron Katie's work?
Not too much. Go ahead.
Okay.
Well, and I don't know if my audience is anyway, so would you briefly sort of elaborate on what it is?
Yeah, so she's not a therapist. She is someone who's gone through her own spiritual awakening. She's written beautiful books. One of them is called Loving What Is. So I mentioned that earlier. But I like her inquiry because when I take some of my clients through, I take her questions and kind of modify them for money and around money topics. But when you go through a series of questions that are based on her principles, what happens is people start to, rather than me telling someone, don't judge yourself, don't blame other people, don't blame yourself, you're taking someone through a series of questions that allows them to see the patterns that are arising in their life that are not helpful. But they're figuring that out on their own rather than me telling them, you're not doing this so well, right? Because that just causes more judgment.
That's great. I want to sort of gear the conversation a little differently now, which has to do with these different parts of our world. And when I looked at some of your material, you talk a lot about, being successful and how we define success, both monetarily and personally, really is about, when we start talking about building a fortune, or establishing wealth, how we define wealth. Is wealth just dollars, or is wealth life satisfaction? Could you talk about that a little bit in terms of relationships and couples? And one of the things I've talked a lot about recently is the statement that I've been using is the key to your business success is the relationships at home. And that unless that's in place, all the other stuff's going to suffer. I think you have a little different approach on this, more like sort of work-life integration, but I wanted you to talk about that.
Yeah. So first of all, a lot of my research and work has been around that first thing I shared with you, which is this mindset of scarcity. And while we might think of scarcity as being not having enough resources, ultimately, as I worked on this and evaluated it, it ultimately connects to lack of I'm not enough. So we think it's externally focused, but it's really at the end of the day, it comes back to feeling like we're not good enough in some capacity. Does that resonate? And so when we think about money, for example, I truly believe that the reason we are so fixated as a culture around money is that we kind of supplant this feeling of not enough into money. And we go about trying to get more of it because we think ultimately it's going to help us to feel like we're good enough at that deepest level. But as you can imagine, it doesn't always work out that way for many people. So within the relationship dynamic, it's even more complex because now you have two people that are striving to get feelings of being good enough and accomplish that objective. But we're going about it in all these different ways. And the reason I love working with money so much is it's a very powerful indicator of the things that are going on. It's like an external sign of oftentimes the trials and tribulations of what's going on inside of us. So the more we get in touch with ourselves, our own inner wisdom, the more we start to take greater awareness of money, of our relationships, and of our connection with all of life. And so I do love the idea of work-life balance. I love the idea of integrating. But I've found, the people who are drawn to my work, I think oftentimes really love work. They get a lot of satisfaction from work, but they also have, relationships, and they have other things that are really important to them, their health. And so the more we can focus on being very intentional. Maybe that's kind of the message I want to give you, is it's about intention, about really knowing why you're pursuing something and what you ultimately want to get from that thing that you're pursuing. And the more awareness you have of that, the more I have found, the more happiness we have in our lives. So that's why I like to play with money and play with balance, because balance is important. Now, I do agree, as a working mom who's very active, I would not tell you on any given day everything is in perfect balance. But what I will tell you is I'm very aware of where it's not in balance. And I'm probably shifting to make sure that those things don't get out of hand. But it's a navigation of being very aware that my relationships with my family are deeply important to me. My business is super important, and I love my client and my friendships, that are formed through the work that I do. Those, and then my health, of course. So those are my priorities, and I keep them front and center. And I found that it's very, very powerful to be incredibly intentional with my activities, to make sure they're in alignment with what I want. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps tremendously. And I'm thinking about the issues that I tend to hear from people who are entrepreneurs. The relationship challenges are, if you're an entrepreneur, you really are working, or could work, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you love what you do, it's not a problem doing it. It's sort of like, it's fun. Right. I love it. I'm passionate about it. It's sort of with my work, same kind of thing. But occasionally, the challenges my wife and I have, and I've heard from other couples, is I come home and she turns to me and said, "When are you going to clock out? When are you going to stop working and have time for me?" And I go, and, we have such a open, close relationship. My reaction is always, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize this. I need to do something about it." But it's not so easy to just do it. Do you have recommendations on, and what I liked about what you just said a moment ago is the whole concept of the intentional behavior. I use the term intentional relationship in a similar way. I think it's about that intentional piece, isn't it?
So this past year, my family and I have been traveling, and we lived in Hawaii last fall. And when we came back, I realized that I had just taken several months to decompress and operate my business in a very low gear mode, which was beautiful. And it taught me a lot about how I was working way too much in my business, just putting so much of myself before we had gone to Hawaii, and that I needed to come up with a new way of being going forward in order to continue to have these deep, meaningful relationships that had been developed, right, in Hawaii in this downtime. And so I started implementing, I worked with a coach that was oriented to productivity and time management. And a few of the things that I started putting into place that I can share with you now that have been huge life-changing things for my business is, number one, we talked about it earlier, was this idea of themes, theme days, theme weeks, paying great attention to the intention of what it is I'm trying to accomplish in my business. But the other one that comes to mind when you were asking the question was around blocking and tackling. And that is being able to understand that when we run businesses, it is easy to work all the time and just to have it run into the evenings, run into the weekends. And in order to shift that, we have to find the missing time. We have to figure out, where is there any time that's being lost? And one of the ways I figured this out through this coach was context switching, which is the idea that multitasking, right, or shifting from one project to another all day long can actually cause us to lose a ton of productivity, because the mind takes, 10 or 15 minutes to switch into a new task. And if we're switching tasks all day long, the thought was that we could be losing as much as 80% of our productivity. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
That's a tremendous number.
It is. And I looked at my life and I looked at my busy days and I could tell that I was really not doing business the way that I had done business back when I was in my corporate job, and I was incredibly efficient. I wasn't running my business that way. And in all fairness, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, I noticed that I am not alone in this one. We have some great skills in our corporate job because we're being paid. We come and start our business and we have so many things to do. We just kind of jump from task to task all day long. And what I found was that was bad form, and I needed to change it. And so what I started to do was be better at organizing my calendar so that I had blocks of time to work on specific tasks without any interruptions happening whatsoever. So I could get really deep, get it done, and not have that task be pushed off to the next day and the next day and run on, for sometimes months on end. So that was a big one. The other was being very conscious of just time management in general, like opening my eyes to the podcasts out there, the different, teachers that can be very helpful. And I'm kind of like a sponge where I started taking that in. And before you knew it, I saw that it was really helping my clients too. So organizing around 90-day plans and being able to be more effective in saying, this is what I want to accomplish. And having money, bringing money back into this, if something isn't going to make me money or accomplish a really important objective, I need to let it go. And it's fun. If it wants to be counted on my fun days, fine. But don't get confused about some of these things that you are spending a lot of time on that aren't actually affecting your bottom line, for example. So that's another tip that we can pay attention to.
Let me ask this question about that last statement, though. There are so many things in business these days, particularly since a lot of online businesses are doing things that don't directly generate income immediately, but down the road might, like exposure. How would you fit that into that concept?
So here's my take on it, having gone kind of full circle, because I've built a business that was very oriented around exposure and saw that many of the seeds that I was planting weren't actually bringing me the results that I wanted. And so what I've done now is I will put them on a hierarchy where, yes, exposure is important, but it's not going to be one of my top line initiatives. It's going to be a sub point, and I will get to that when I have time. Even something like, a podcast, there's a couple ways that you can be more effective in a podcast, right? Is you may shift in the beginning. It may be all about other people, right? I do a podcast. I have a lot of interviews of other people, but over time I was like, wait a minute, these people are calling me and telling me that they're getting a lot of business from my podcast. I don't actually know if I've gotten any business from my podcast. So maybe I need to shift things so that it is also accomplishing my objectives, which is I can't do this podcast if I'm not, making money, obviously, in my business. So sometimes we hide. The point probably that's even more important is sometimes we hide around behind things that we think are going to give us the big payday later on. And they're fun and they're easy and they're in our comfort zone and they're enjoyable. But in reality, we probably should be focusing on a few other things that might be outside of our comfort zone, but would actually affect our bottom line far more effectively, especially in the short term. So there's a balance with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a really good way for people to look at it because, not only do we have to manage the time in the business, but if you're going to have a relationship, we have to put that on the calendar as well in terms of what is, going to promote that security at home. So I like your whole idea of blocks of time. I have even gotten to the point, some people think it's a little weird, but it works for me. I schedule on my calendar spending time with my wife. I put it down so I can look at the whole day and say, I'm not allowed at these times to do anything but that.
I heard someone say that when you look at your calendar, pay close attention because that's a reflection of you and your priorities. And so you just said it. Your priority is that time. It's on the calendar. I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at your life, many of us who are organized and want to be, productive, we do need a calendar to keep us on track. So the calendar is a great indicator, kind of like a journal, where it says, this is what's important to you. And is it reflective of your intentions?
Right. The other thing, I think, when we start talking about being an entrepreneur, and I think a high majority of us who have decided to go in our own business has been because we've worked in other settings and realized we don't get to spend enough time, and that it was just about work. I mean, I know I work so that I have, talking about resources, I have resources so my wife and I can go on nice vacations. That's really why I work. I love what I do, but truthfully, it's all about what does it offer us? But we lose that. We forget that's why we do what we do. And unless we remind ourselves that day in, day out, and here's the key that I stress, you best remind your wife or your husband that this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because you're in it every minute of the day. And people don't talk enough about that.
That's great. Yeah, we love hiking, and Sedona is a great place to hike. And so it's that same thing. Like, that's our way of getting really, really clear about what's important to us as we get out there on those trails. And it's like heaven.
But the important concept I'm trying to stress with that is really telling your partner, telling the person you're spending your life with, why I work is for us. I'm doing this for you because I want a life that the two of us can just have a blast with. And I think when you do that, and that's the real intention, people have a way of going, I'll work with you now. Because I forget sometimes when you're working so much and you're doing so much that I'm even in your thoughts. And you have to tell people when they are.
Yeah, I love it.
It's just such a, the way you work is just so wonderful, and having that sort of sixth sense that, I have a couple more questions before we stop for today, but this whole concept that you brought up earlier just fascinates me, and is this whole empath piece, that this sixth sense. And I think people a lot of times wonder, do I see one person, another person? You're a financial planner. There's hundreds of financial planners out there. But having someone who really feels what's needed, how do you use that?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't always really understand or appreciate this gift that I feel like I've been given in this life. And now I have come to deeply appreciate it, because what it allows me to do is connect into my clients. I love, helping entrepreneurs figure out exactly what you just said, their why, and tie it into successful, business creation, but also work-life balance. And what it allows me to do is I have a few different abilities that, I'll try to explain. One is clairaudience, which means that when people talk, I hear things at a different level than most, where I can quickly identify where the most intense emotional energy is being held around a topic. And you do it, right? You're trained to do that. Well, I've not received any training, around therapy or psychology even. It's been this gift where I used to notice it. And before it was part of my job to help people with this, I learned that it could be kind of dangerous to speak up about things that I would feel, because people are so caught off guard by, how could you know that about me? I didn't tell you that. Why are you asking me questions about this? So I learned that I had to be really careful. But now, people come to me and they're not sure. Like, I think that we live such busy lives that we have a hard time sorting through what are the things that are causing us the most intense suffering. And so I can feel it in their in the way that they speak. I also have the ability of seeing things, what's called clairsentient, which is being able to see pictures of things. And I don't even have to understand them. I just talk about what I'm seeing, and people immediately start to get connections for what it is that's coming up for them. So, I am not trying to be a therapist in any way, but I do bring things to light that allow us to dive into them to say, oh, isn't that interesting that you're having a really hard time getting out there and selling, for example? That's a really common one. And we can kind of pull out some of the emotional energy that's tied up in knots that they have never connected to why they don't like to get out and sell, for example. So does that help? I mean, it's hard.
It basically is a sixth sense that helps people really connect with those areas in their work life, in their home life. It would also be true that is something that they may not even be in tune to. And if they tune into it, that just opens up a whole nother world for them.
Yeah. And in all fairness, I think that every one of us had these skills. I think especially when we're children, we have these abilities. But when we go to school and we start getting trained to learn all of this external stuff, our life gets very externally focused. It's about learning and knowledge outside of ourselves. And unfortunately, there's only a few educational methods that focus more on what's going on inside of you. What do you feel? What do you want to spend more time doing? There isn't a lot of attention on that inner voice. And so the more I can help my clients learn that inner voice is not just, potentially powerful, it can have a much bigger impact in their lives and help them to avoid a lot of challenges and difficulties that right now are happening over and over and over again, but they're just not listening to the voice that's saying, hey, help me out, slow down, listen, because I've got something to tell you. So I help them listen.
Well, I want to just thank you again for giving of yourself, your time. I think, one of the things that I am an expert at is feeling people's heart. That's what I do as a marriage counselor. And I can feel how much you care about what you do and you care about the people. And you've, as we started with the conversation, and you brought it up earlier, for me, hypocrisy is something that I have a difficult time with. People say they do one thing, they teach one thing and do something else. That's why I love emotionally focused therapy. It is fit for me because, being vulnerable, that's just who I am. And it just is a nice fit. For you, I can feel how much you care about what you do and how much you want to give to the people that you work with. So thank you very much for giving yourself your time, coming on and teaching some of this. If people want to get hold of you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
So easily they can reach out to me, and I'm happy to even do, complimentary sessions, like 20-minute sessions where we just get to the root of something that they're stuck on. So anytime that my email is lpeterson@wealthclinic.com, and it just runs to the two words together. You can also check out the website, wealthclinic.com, or my other website, which is Leisa Peterson, Leisa Peterson, Peterson, all one word running together.com. But you'll get a feel for meditations, the podcasts, those focus on money and spirituality. A lot of the conversation we've had today, with other people out there that are interested in kind of the mind and shifting their relationship with money. So lots of free resources on those sites. And I invite, anyone, if they've got a quick question, I'm also happy to answer that too.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all of you for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Take care and stay connected. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with your host, Stuart Fensterheim. You're one step closer to reigniting that fiery passion with your partner. For more information
and your 30-minute free phone consultation with Stuart,
visit www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. We'll see you next time.